Hello and welcome. I'm Carolyn Grimminger with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our program's mission is to nourish the mind and spirit and serve social justice. Our forums occur on most Sundays and are free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. Our church is physically located at 4700 Grover Avenue in Austin, Texas. For more information about our Public Affairs Forum and our church, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Dr. Courtney Robinson is the founder of the Excellence and Advancement Foundation, a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to transforming how communities combat the school-to-prison pipeline and mass incarceration. Excellence and Advancement Foundation uses an ecosystems approach to provide prevention, intervention, and advocacy. The organization assists schools, justice systems, and community organizations with critical, transformative, and restorative solutions to culture, race, school discipline, and incarceration. Dr. Robinson serves as an adjunct professor at Houston-Tillotson University and Southwestern University. Dr. Robinson is also the associate producer for Black Academics TV on PBS. She has also presented at South by Southwest EDU in 2017 and 2018. She serves on the Greater Austin Area My Brother's Keeper Violence Prevention and Second Chance Committee, Equity Advocates, and Pflugerville Independent School District's Innovation Committee. Laura Elmore-Sovine currently serves as the Executive Director for Austin Recovery. Prior to that, she was the Social Services Program Administrator for Travis County Health and Human Services. Prior to this, she was a Senior Program Coordinator for Communities and Schools, supervising after-school programming on 12 campuses, partnered with 6 public housing projects. Let's welcome our speakers.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. Today, we really want to talk about how we come to this work, how we know each other, our friendship, our relationship, and what that means to us both professionally and personally. Laura and I have known each other for over 17 years now, and we met initially when we worked together at a nonprofit organization, and we realized that we had kindred spirits and that our work really aligned, and the relationship sort of bloomed from there.
So this photo before that was of our husbands. So we're going to talk to you today anecdotes from our own lives to kind of share what has been challenging for us, how we have supported and challenged each other in it, how we would ask that you support and challenge each other in it, people in it. And so it's not going to be it won't be an academic presentation, and it won't be a how-to. It won't be everything you ever wanted to know to fix everything in 45 minutes. We have done this. We did this presentation at a conference of all moms, and it was huge. It was like in a hotel ballroom, and we were shocked at how long the Q&A took. So I want to make sure that we save plenty of time for the Q&A, because that's really where the real probably learning and stuff is happening. So I would encourage you to be brave.
Mothers are so powerful. Not that dads don't have a role, but what we found is that when mothers get together and begin to talk, and when we think about all of the historical things that women have done, we really feel like mothers have a huge role in shaping how their children interact with other children and how their children understand their own identity. And so we aren't discounting the role of fathers, because fathers play a huge role, but we do understand that over time and throughout history, when we think about the Women's Suffrage March and civil rights movements and equal pay, and there's so many other issues that women have had to combat, we feel like understanding how women can come together and parent in a way that is productive for their children is really important. So we want to start with some pictures of our children. We had some other pictures, and it was so interesting when we went back to this presentation and we realized how much our children had grown up and how much we learned both as mothers in this sort of period of their lives and ours as well. We want to be sure that you see our children, because oftentimes people don't always see children as children. And so today, part of what we want to do is talk to you about how we see our children collectively. And also to talk about what is racism.
I wanted to tell you too about, in relation to Moms Are Powerful, did you guys see the movie Hidden Figures?
Yes.
Okay, so I know a man who is 72 years old who saw that movie, a white man, who was in abject grief after seeing the movie. It was like he just realized what had happened all of those years, that he was living in the middle of segregation. And he remembers his mother telling him not to touch the vegetables in the produce section because colored people touch them. And like you see the scene in Hidden Figures where she's like not allowed to drink the same coffee as the other workers, right? And this man was just sobbing as though it was new information, which really, really blew my mind in terms of the generational stuff around that, and the fact that he remembered his mom telling him that what you're saying and what you're not saying as a mom is making a huge difference. Given that, I think especially in the current national climate, we're extremely divided. It's very intense, it's very nasty. People are on the defensive, and I know for me, every time I get into an interaction with somebody where I feel like I'm trying to speak up for people of color, for any kind of issue that gets people who are white to be a little defensive. They want to say, well, I am not racist. I am not a racist person. I would never do something like that. That's the KKK. Those are people with white hoods. That's somebody who's like spitting on someone who's black. That's someone who's not hiring someone because they're black. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about individual acts of racism. I think that's become less socially acceptable and more clear. What isn't clear and what people have a hard time getting their brain around is systemic racism. This has been very hard for me to get my brain around my whole career. This is not something I was raised with. This is not something that was talked about to me until I was probably in my 20s. One of the things that stood out to me when Courtney and I became friends was that our experiences were already so different, because how could she not think about that issue until she was 20? That's not possible, right? But I get to not think about that until I'm 20. And then I get to cry about it when somebody tells me what really happened, right? So it's not an individual act, it's a system that we all built. And we built it years, hundreds of years ago. We built it, all white men built it. So it's hard to imagine that they weren't building it with their own thinking in mind, right? People back then, if you were not a white man, you were considered someone's property, period, end of story, for a really, really long time. So if that's the way we built the laws, that's the way we built the Constitution, that's the way we built all the institutions that came after that, we're swimming in it. So it's like
the air.
It's like the air.
The air that you breathe. No one can escape it.
It's the idea that being white is the standard, because it's the majority, and everything else is other. And so we've built our whole communities around it. So this next part is the part that Courtney keeps trying to cut out of the presentation. She keeps trying to cut it out because she thinks it's basic, and she thinks everybody knows it, and it's too many slides. And I keep saying we have to keep it in because even I need to hear this again. So you guys tell me, raise your hand if you can go into any store in this town and find shampoo for your hair or nude colored Band-Aids that match your skin. Raise your hand if you wish you can arrange to be in the company of people of your race most of the time. This one stood out to me when we did the MomCom presentation. 200 moms probably. And all the marketing of the conference was this kind of woman with a cape, this like superhero figure, and she was white. And I guess it's fine that she's white. It doesn't it's not like she can't be white, but when I asked them, what would happen if the superhero woman on all of the marketing for this event was black? Would you feel like you weren't welcome there? Because, I mean, was there a black woman in the audience?
It was myself and one other person.
Okay, so I think she was the one out of like 200 white moms. And it's just, you don't think about it, you just see it and you go, oh, that's normal, and then that's the black one. That's normal, and that's the black superhero. You don't see it as like, if you saw that black woman and you were a white woman, wouldn't you think to yourself for a minute, I'm not welcome there, I don't belong there, I should probably go to a different event. And meanwhile, what's it like for Courtney to show up and speak to that room with all that marketing like that? So these are the types of things that we gotta keep in mind.
Because it speaks to, can not other women be superhero moms? That's sort of the thing that goes through people's heads, like, well, why can't we be superheroes too? And so it kind of goes to how we understand our heritage and how history is told, and whose history we hear, and how people understand who they are, how their identity is built in our K through 12 system. And oftentimes, I have a program called the Black Leadership Academy. And the program is essentially for children 3rd grade through 12th grade. And we teach a very inclusive history of America through a black lens. Because oftentimes, kids never ever hear about anyone who's black that's done anything, except for, what are the three?
Oprah.
So, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Oprah, and sometimes, like at a really progressive school, Thurgood Marshall. That's it. That's it. And so when we're thinking about how we're shaping children's identity on who is good and who has accomplished things and who's successful, those are the things that our children hear and sink in without us even thinking about it. So when we're talking about systematic racism or institutionalized racism, we're talking about how very seamless it is and how we don't even think about what our children learn the entire time they're in the K through 12 program here in Texas. With that said, school is one of the first places that race happens. So I want to share just a little story with you. You saw a picture of my daughter. She is a fantastic young woman, and I'm not biased at all, not at all. But she's a joy. She just really has a light about her, and just a gift. Well, when she was 3 years old, in a preschool classroom, one of her classmates called her a nigger. So, and my daughter isn't 45, she's 11. So, this isn't something that happened a long, long time ago. Racism isn't something that's buried way back here. And people say things like, oh my gosh, I just don't know where she could get that from. Really? She got it from the people that she's around. She may have heard mom, uncle, dad, someone use the word, and she knew at 3 exactly the person she should call a nigger. Race happens immediately. And how we treat race in our schools is very defining. Laura's story, I think, is really interesting about how race happens in our school in ways that we often don't think about.
So I think sometimes that for me, it's challenging for me to put myself in Courtney's shoes. One of the early conversations we had, she was talking about Jamar, who, if you saw the photo of him, he looks like a man. He's not quite a man, but he was one when we met. And one of the things that she said was that her goal was basically to keep him out of prison. And I was like, well, of course he's not going to prison. I mean, he has great parents, he lives in a great neighborhood, and goes to great schools. And she was like, yeah, no, that's not what it's like for me. I'm raising a black man in Texas. They're like 1 in 3 are in prison. The odds are against me. And so like it was really important for me to be listening, right? Not talking, not telling, not believing, but just hearing that that's how she thinks of him. That's how she's afraid all the time, and in a way that I'm not. My kid looks like some kind of Aryan something. He's, in the photo, his hair is green, but it's really blonde. His eyes are blue, and it never one time has occurred to me he would ever go. Not even one time. I feel like I have complete control over that, and Courtney does not feel that way at all. So in kindergarten, Kieran, my son, met Jaheen, his best friend. There will be a photo op of Kieran and Jaheen. They're right there in the top left. That's them like this summer, and they're both in 6th grade now. But in kindergarten, when they met on the first day, like kindergarten roundup, and they immediately connected and made slime together and stayed as, they were like a team for kindergarten. Kindergarten was so hard. It was so hard on him. My kid, he had come from a really like loving kind of hippie preschool where everyone told him he was brilliant all the time. And he got to kindergarten and he was like, kept saying, I'm not smart, I'm not smart, I'm not smart, I can't do this, I can't do this. And it was so, he struggled so much with the adjustment. And Jaheen was the only thing about school that he liked. So much so that then once he started to get a little more comfortable, they started to act up, talk and not work and play and not follow the rules and do stuff, act up. The teacher was like done with them. She called me several times and she was like, you've got to do something about Kieran and Jaheen. So we came up with this really cool idea to make behavior charts for them. Well, we made a behavior chart for Kieran because she said, really, Kieran is the one causing the problem. Jaheen is following him. Because Kieran's kind of a leader, like, so he's suggesting we don't do the work and we do something else, and Jaheen is going along with it, and that's the dynamic that she saw. So she made Kieran a behavior chart and had pictures of Jaheen. Every day he got a picture of Jaheen on his behavior chart, and if he earned the whole, good marks for that week, then Jaheen, his mom, and I set up a sleepover. So at the time, me and Tiffany were both single moms with these boys in kindergarten that the teacher was like, please, for the love of God, fix them. So we didn't really have a choice but to become friends. So we became friends. And we were like, how do we get them to like deal with kindergarten? So we did this behavior chart thing. We started having sleepovers. They became even closer then, et cetera, et cetera. There was a point where they did they were doing a parent-teacher conference. And the kindergarten teacher said, Kieran is a natural leader, back to the thing, right? Anything he says, the other kids do. He's smart, he reads well. She said, I wish he would read more because he really preferred to do math. But he can, he has the capacity, I know he has it, I know how smart he is and how much leadership potential he has. And I was like thrilled. I'm like, oh my God, I won kindergarten. Like, my kid is awesome. We're all gonna survive this, everything's great. And I went out onto the playground and I saw Tiffany and I said, hey, how'd your parent-teacher conference go? And she says, the teacher says Jaheen has a learning disability. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, she says he can't behave, he can't sit still, he's not reading the way he should or learning to read, he doesn't seem interested in it, and he's causing all these problems, so he must have a learning disability. And I was like, hang on a second. My kid is the instigator. And your kid has a learning disability? I'm like, your kid spends the night at my house all the time. I know he doesn't have a learning disability. I know he doesn't. And it had not occurred to her to push back, because how do you push back when you're a single mom, that's your first kid, that's your only kid, he's 5, and the first teacher he's ever had says he has a learning disability. The first thing you do is go, well, I better go get him tested and do everything. I mean, she was freaking out. And I was like, here's what's gonna happen. You and me are gonna go talk to the principal. I'm going with you. Because the other thing that Courtney and I can tell you in every setting is that she says something and everybody goes, oh, well, of course she says she's black. If I say it, everybody's listening all of a sudden. That happens to us literally everywhere we go. It's probably not happening right now. Maybe it is. But it's happened. We have presented on, not this. This is our fun stuff. We do this for fun. Our real presentations are like statistics and history and disproportionality from foster care to death row. We put her dissertation on school to prison pipeline with my social work background We've testified on the same case in a death penalty trial. Everywhere we go, I have to say what she said just for it to be heard, even though she's Dr. Robinson and I'm not. So I went with Tiffany to that meeting, and we actually got something done there. So Jaheim does not have a learning disability. He never did. He doesn't now. He's doing great in middle school and is the star running back on his middle school football team. And they are like that, and in completely weird ways, because Jaheim is a jock and Kieran is a nerd, in case you can't tell. And they have a fantasy that Jaheim is going to be a football star and he's going to go to UT, and Kieran's going to go and become an engineer, and they're going to invent things together with all of their money that they make from the future football career. So anyway, my point is that it's super easy, right, for me to just walk away from that playground conversation, because it's not my kid. If her kid has a learning disability, that sucks for her. But I was like, no, we're going back, because I know my kid is the problem here. And the fact that he's white and yours isn't, and he's gonna get that assessment, your assessment is he's broken, and my assessment is he's a leader, that's sick. And they're only 5. So at 5, they described each other as, Kieran says, I've known Jaheim my entire life. And he hasn't, but he doesn't remember his life before Jaheim. But he talks about him like he met him in a foxhole in Vietnam. Like, to them, that was what kindergarten was like. It was just hard. And so he's like, but we're connected, we're bonded, we're a team. So when they were 5, that was easy. Because even though they saw race and it was talked about, they didn't see each other as very, very different in terms of what was inside of them. That starts to change in 6th grade.
And it's hard when it starts to change. And as a mom, it's been hard for me to watch with both of my children how that change begins to happen. Because then they begin to see how people are treated differently in the world based on race. So the innocence is really lost. Laura talked about sort of my fear being a mom of a young black boy, and it is a true fear. He's 17 years old. Every single time he leaves the house, I pray. I pray that if he's ever pulled over, that he follows all the rules that we talked to him about. We brought a police officer into his life to teach him every single step that he has to take if he's ever pulled over by the police. That if he's ever pulled over, he just comes home to me. I worry that in the blink of an eye, someone will kill my son just because he's wearing his favorite hoodie. Because in this country, people first see my son as a criminal, then as a really great student, a budding filmmaker, a talented musician, and a really great athlete. So the fear isn't just this irrational sort of fear. It is fear because I know what can happen to young black men even when the parents are doing all of the right things. So, we put these pictures up because we make an effort to ensure that our children try and maintain their relationships with their friends. And we talk very honestly with them about race. It's never too early to start talking to children about race. For some reason, white parents feel like they have to shelter their children from race, as if, okay, if we don't talk about it, they're going to be sheltered and protected and we won't break them and they will be just fine. Meanwhile, black parents at 3 have to talk to their children about race. So it's this sort of privilege of being able to ignore race. But what happens when what happens when white parents don't talk to their children about race is that it opens up horrible, horrible circumstances for these children. Because if my son's friends are with him, they need to know what to do to protect him if something happens. If they are pulled over by the police, if he finds himself being chased by a group of white guys who want to beat him up. They need to know how to respond. They need to know what to do. So, part of it is talking to kids. The other part is listen. Listen to the people with lived experience. When black people say there's racism, there's racism. Also, I hear people say all the time, well, my intentions. I had really great intentions. Have you guys ever heard that saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions? So instead of thinking about what your intentions are, maybe think about being intentional. Intentional about the conversations that you have. Intentional about building relationships. Intentional about how you respond to what we see all the time in the media. Be intentional about how many black people do you have coffee with? How many Latina X people do you have coffee with? How many people who are of Asian or Indian descent do you have coffee with?
To piggyback on what Courtney said about speaking of, I guess about the idea of trying to shelter your kid. And I can really relate to that because I really wanted, especially with Karen's relationships with other kids, to just not poison it with stuff that feels awful, right? Like to me, it's like, oh, like do we have to talk about race? That's hard. It's complicated. Can they even understand it at this age? Well, he doesn't really. He didn't. But his friends did. Like he has the privilege not to have to worry about it, right? So I think we just kind of have to be brave. Like when you pair up with another mom, and for us it's moms and not dads, but dads work too. When you pair up with another parent, when you pair up with an ally, when you do that cross-racially, you're creating a level of power that really can't be pushed back. It really takes a village. If it's only the black mom saying, my kid's being bullied, my kid's being discriminated against, I'm telling you this happens to us everywhere we go. We just testified in a case where we were working with attorneys from out of state. And I told them, you need to put my testimony on after hers. And they said, why? And I said, because everything she says is going to be discounted. Her dissertation is on 4 generations of black men incarcerated in Dallas County. We were testifying on a case with a black man in Dallas County. So she's the expert, not me. But I have to re-say what she said in a way that they can hear. The attorneys were like, no. And I was like, have you ever done this in a court in Texas? They were like, no. It's like, well, good luck with that. We're swimming upstream all the time. And Courtney told me one time too that when she used to live in California, her friends were so much more racially diverse than they are. In Texas, we're very segregated. It's not legal, it just is. It's just, we don't hang out with each other. So standing together is really the most powerful thing you can do for each other. It's giving voice, using your power for good.
Oh, colorblind. Yes, we probably should talk about being colorblind. Please don't, because it doesn't exist. It's just a fallacy. I mean, when I walked in here, did you guys think, she's not really black?
I don't see race.
I don't see race. Everyone sees race. And that's okay. It's good to see race. I've been black my entire life. So it's okay. What's important is that you begin to understand people who have different cultural experiences. Because race really isn't an actual thing. It really is a social construct. When we think about DNA and biology and all those things, our DNA may be more closely related than my DNA with Amara. It really is something that we've constructed. It's not a real thing, but how we respond to it is very real. The systems that we put in place are very, very real. But pretending like color doesn't exist actually holds racism in place. Because then you start to say, well, if everyone had like a white layer, it's almost like you ignore who people really are. and try and create some sort of neutrality, which is impossible. In this current system, it's impossible. We tried it with the Native people. Remember, we sent them off hundreds and hundreds of miles away from their families, stripped them of their language, their culture, their land, and tried to, quote unquote, civilize them or assimilate them.
Neutralize them.
Neutralize them. People have culture. People are Swedish and German and French. People have culture. And it's only more significant when the person with culture is a person of color. And I would much prefer people honor my blackness and honor who I am and what that means in the world. And I think that children respond when people see them for who they really are in totality. You want to answer that?
Because of the, so another example of one time my dad said something about me. He said, my daughter is the most colorblind person that I know. And I was like, I don't feel colorblind. I mean, I feel like it's there. I see it. I'm willing to talk about it. But what he means is my daughter is nicer to black people than anyone that I know. That's probably a generational issue. I don't know, but I thought that was interesting. He meant it as a compliment, of course. But the reason why we talk about that the relationships are so important is because you also can easily block out what doesn't apply to you. Like if you don't know anyone who's black, you don't, it's all like theoretical. It's like that's a political issue, right? People keep talking about being politically correct, and let's not talk about politics. I'm like, it's not politics. I don't know how many times I've said this, it's personal. It's values based. It's people's lives. It's relationships. So if you don't, if privilege is kind of saying that something is not a thing because it hasn't happened to you. So for you to be close to people who are not like you, and this applies not only to color, this applies to gender, this applies to sexual orientation, it applies to immigration status, it applies across the board. To find and seek out people that are different than you and not just to like kind of look at, but to actually sit down with. Courtney likes coffee, we also like wine. We feel like we can solve a lot of problems that way.
Yes, we fixed a
We
lot
do a
of
lot
things.
of good that way. But we have to make an effort because Lord knows we're both busy. We have kids, we have jobs that take us out of town, we have husbands, we have stuff to do. But we make a priority to see each other and also to call each other and be like, can you check me on this? Can you help me see this through your perspective? And not to be scared to do that. And I'm not scared. I'm nervous sometimes when I ask her what she thinks because she might tell me. And then I might go, all right, let me think about that again. But we're both doing that for each other.
Because I was going to say, it goes the same way. You know, sometimes when I have a student in class, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, is every white girl in my class going to cry? Like, what is it? What am I doing? You know, what am I doing? And she says, I need you to be patient. Like, back up, hold on. Like, we do for each other. It is not just her calling and saying, is this a black thing? Is this not a black? I'm calling like, is this a white thing? Like, what am I, like, what are you doing?
Well, it also creates empathy when I tell her, I was that white girl. Don't give up on her. She's freaking out because she's experiencing a little bit of to her, it's new information, it's terrifying, it's sad, she doesn't know what to do, and I was her, and eventually she's going to be an ally, but you're going to have to be patient with her, and that's kind of a lot to ask, to do that over and over and over again. But I also had like a mentor who was a black woman professor at the University of Texas who sat there and listened to me cry. And it was like really meaningful to me. And like, so for us to see all of that as somebody's pain, right? Just somebody's pain, whether it's legit to you or not, it's legit to them. So we've got to hear it. And we've got to also make the effort to keep these kids connected and to put your kid in an environment where people don't look like them. It's the most important thing you can do for kids. because they need to grow up that way. If you've never seen anybody different than you, and this is still true, we definitely have neighborhoods where this is true. You've never seen anybody that doesn't look like you. You've never seen anybody that's not your religion. You've never seen anybody outside of your experience or actually built a friendship with them, then the differences and the racism has become so depersonalized. And then you can call it politics, but it's not, it's personal. So I have to make an effort to keep Kieran in touch with Jaheim because Jaheim moved to Georgetown. And so they're not in the same school. And they're in 6th grade. And I'm getting like terrified that they're gonna start seeing each other as other and not on the same team, not in the foxhole. And so we force them, you don't force them, they ask to see each other, but you know, we make it a point. And I don't even see Tiffany that much, his mom. But I'm like, all right, we're cooking out all day, come over, he's gonna spend the night, we're gonna do this stuff together, and we just do it to keep them together. I don't know how it's gonna go, 6th grade, middle school, high school, if they'll be able to keep it together, but I want them to try to humanize each other so that it can't break them, it can't change them, all the crap that we've built as adults.
And for me, it's a both and. So I have to keep my children connected to children who are not like them, because I think it's important to have multicultural friendships, because I think we're better for it, we're better human beings for it. On the other hand, I have to put them with all Black kids sometimes so that they know that there's nothing wrong with them, that they have value being a Black kid, and that their identity is okay and it's safe. And so, for me, it's both and, because I have to ensure that my children go into the world a whole person and not feeling in some way that they are less than.
I was thinking too, that Courtney's Black Leadership Academy, I sent Kieran to it, and he was the only Black kid, and that was super fun. And somebody said to me, well, when you send in there, what's the agenda? I was like, what do you mean? They're like, I'm like, well, it's, you know, it's teaching like history, and I think this particular session is themed around inventions and sort of people in history that have invented things and done really innovative things that are Black, because we don't really see that in the books about inventors and cool stuff that has been created. And they're like, no, but I mean, what's the agenda? Like, what's under that? What are they gonna try to get him to do or think? You know? And I was like, I don't really understand the question. But I mean, I think he was probably he's kind of introverted as it is, so he doesn't really want to like speak up and stand up, and he's not very loud. But so he was quiet a lot. But I was like, even if it's uncomfortable for him, he needs to feel what it feels like to be the only one in the room that looks like him. Because people feel like that. Other people feel like that all the time. He never does. So he needs to feel that anxiety. I teach in the school of social work. I teach group counseling, and I have the students do a group, like a real group. So they get into project groups, they meet for 10 sessions, they rotate who the counselor is, and then they talk about their real stuff. And when I ask them to do it in a fishbowl, like in front of the class, they're all like, oh no, like I don't want to volunteer for that, I'm not gonna do that. I'm like, but I need you to do it because I need you to feel the anxiety of sharing your stuff with somebody you don't know. That's what we ask for our clients to do in therapy all the time. And then we expect it to be like, well, just put your stuff out, just dump it out. You need to feel what it's like. You need to be empathizing for them, and the only way to do that is to kind of have your own experience with it. So I kind of plopped him in the middle of that BLA course.
It was good.
It was good. So that's the end of our presentation, and we're right on time.
Just to breathe together.
Introduce yourself, please.
Hello, I'm
Richard Halpin, and I'm a member of this church. And I worked with school dropouts for 30-something years. And I always struggled with this because the insidiousness of racism didn't start when they dropped out of high school. And it didn't start in 6th grade when they went not so good academically. It went way back. And thank you today for you exposing that insidiousness and invisibility-ness of that. How can we take this critical message that the two of you share so well and present it to people, particularly people of my race, to capture these insights that you've presented so well? How can we do more of that, do you think?
I don't know the answer to that. How can we do that?
Well, I think that, you know, oftentimes people ask us that question, and I really think that it begins with the people that are closest to you. Who is your circle of influence? Who are your people? Because when you start talking to your people, then your people start talking to people, and then they start talking to people. I really believe each one teach one. So if there is one person that you begin to share the information with, then the hope is that they will then share the information as well. It's really important to do it with the people that are closest to you, the people that will really hear you. That's my suggestion each time, is that deal with your circle of influence.
And that is a good reminder that each one teach one is the thing that she tells me when I get really angry at somebody that's in my circle of influence that's not hearing me, or I'm like, how are they not like enlightened as I am right now about this? And she's much more patient than I am because she's used to it. Like, she's used to kind of banging her head against a wall. And so she's like, okay, each one teach one, you know, you keep trying and you keep talking and really, like I said about how my credibility comes off different than hers, yours does even more. You're a white guy, that's a lot of power. That means that when people hear you say this is true, they see you as not having anything to gain from that.
Right.
Because you're already kind of at the top of the food chain according to how we built everything. So when you say it, it's really ally and powerful. It makes you a co-conspirator. It makes you part of the conspiracy that we're working on towards equity. And it's very powerful when it comes from guys like you. So thanks for offering.
And we often hear, and you brought up allies, you know, we often hear this word ally. Ally is kind of passive. It is if you are saying, okay, I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm just going to stand right here and not hurt you. That doesn't mean that you're going to jump in the fight when something happens. We need people who are going to co-conspire, who are going to work together and fight together and laugh together and love together, and not just say, oh, gosh, that's terrible what's happening to those people over there, and I feel so bad for them, and I'm never going to do that. That's an ally.
It's also the difference between sympathy and empathy, right? It's like, I'm so sorry that happened to you from over here. Empathy is about crawling down in the hole and going, I am with you. You tell me how we get out. How do we get out? You tell me how to help you, right? Versus like, I'm going to come in and help you. I'm going to make this better. I'm going to tell you how to make it better. Or I'm just going to stand far away and feel sorry for you. Not helpful. Did you have a question? Behind?
He's next.
Oh.
I'm Kenneth Coyne, psychotherapist. I have a question of how would you propose to help the Innocence Project take over in a case that Kenneth brought for federal court? 5 girls allegedly sexually assaulted by one local person. How would you propose for the Innocence Project to take over? We've been 6 years working on this little case, and I can't get past go.
Are you asking how the actual agency, the Innocence Project, would get involved with your case?
It is involved, but there's nothing happening.
We've worked on one particular case now, like 3 years.
The
4?
one we just did?
Yeah.
4 years.
4 years.
And
It's
the work that we have done is, the courts have hired us occasionally to be expert witnesses in sort of mitigation and kind of telling the story of the person who was convicted. Our work has been post-conviction up until now. So I think that might be a side conversation. And both of our email addresses are up here, so if you want to send us an email, we might be able to kind of brainstorm together about who might be able to help you or kind of connect you to some of the people that we know doing similar work, just to see if we can kind of light fires.
And maybe if there's some additional attention that can be brought to that particular case, that sometimes makes a difference as well.
I'm Valerie Stern. I've been working the last few years on looking at segregation in Austin ISD and trying to encourage integration in our schools, because like you said, I believe that when kids have relationships with people who look different than them, it's good. But as I've gone into this, and I work in the schools, I'm wondering if throwing everyone together without some thought, is the best thing, because the schools that are majority students of color are not perfect with cultural proficiency, but they're better at it, and they think about those issues a little bit more, and they have more teachers of color, and the schools that are majority white don't have to think about it because they have the privilege of not thinking about it, and so there's a lot of issues. And so now I'm wondering, maybe I've been working on the wrong thing, and I should have been working on cultural, like encouraging the district to pay for cultural proficiency training for all the teachers and admin and the school board. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts.
It's interesting because we've been trying to, Brown v. Board was a beautiful piece of legislation, ideal. But we've been trying to entangle our way out of it and into it for generations. You're right in that throwing kids together doesn't really solve the issue. The issue is really with the adults in the space. I'm happy to hear that AISD now has more resources, they have a team, and it isn't just one person trying to do cultural proficiency throughout the district. The hope is that there will be more people trained, and you'll see sort of a greater span of teachers who've been trained. But at the same time, we have to think about parents. So parents are sending their children, white flight still exists, just like it did in the 1950s. And so part of it is, how do we help parents talk about race and culture? And that's why we do this work. Because it's not just about what the schools are and aren't doing. That is an issue. But it's also about parents choosing where to send their children and what parents allow to happen. And I think we see that often in our magnet schools in AISD. It is totally the haves and the have-nots. And it continues, and it has been going on for a very, very long time. And until parents get really upset about it and do something about it.
I was going to share a story about that. My kid goes to magnet school, and I wrestled with this because I was like, I don't know that I want him in a protected bubble inside of a school, even though it's a great thing for him academically, even though it's right up his alley. It's like a nerd academy. It's like going to school to be a nerd. I mean, it's like, it's for him. And they came and presented to his elementary school, and he was like, that's what I want to do. And you have to apply, and you have to have reference letters, and it's like college, right? It's a lot of work to apply. But it's been 6 weeks that he's been there, and he just came home the other night, and he was like, so they talk about the kids differently. Like, we're the magnet kids, and the other kids are the academy kids. The academy kids are not white, and the magnet kids are white. What does that mean? I mean, I think my parents would have been like, oh, well, you know, life's not fair, and just like moved on. Like, my parents would not talk to me about that.
Because we have to think about what we're saying is who deserves the education and who doesn't. That's essentially what we're saying to these children. That these guys deserve all the bells and the whistles and all the great things about education, but these children don't deserve those things.
For example, there's a magnet school in the community that the magnet is in like the top 10 in the country, and the school around it is in the bottom 10. That challenges directly the idea of what's a good school. Oh, I gotta put my kid in a good school. A good school means a white school. That when people say that, that's what that means. Because you could make that a good school, you just made it one, right in the middle of that neighborhood. But it's more than that. It's who are the kids? What have they been through? Who are their parents? How involved can the parents be? How much money do they have to put into the PTA? How committed are the teachers? How burned out are the teachers? How much do the teachers know about facilitating a conversation? What do the teachers say when my kid asked that in school? I have no clue. But what I told him was, let's go back to your BLA stuff about history. And I walked him through that again 2 years later. He was like, oh yeah, oh my God, and he even asked about when women got the right to vote. He's like, there are still people alive that remember that, or people alive that were born around the time. I'm like, yeah. He was like blown away, because to him that's like crazy talk. Because in his mind, he told me recently that I was the one in charge in the house. It's just me and my husband and him. And he says, well, he gets to eat cookies for breakfast and I don't. That's not fair. He was tattling. And I was like, well, he's an adult, so he does what he wants. I'm not in charge of him. He was like, yes, you are. You're the only girl in the house.
Yes.
And I was like, wait, what? Like, what? Who's in charge at houses where there are no girls? And he was like, I don't know. I think it's girls, and then if you're the oldest, and it's in that order. So when I told him, well, girls weren't allowed to vote or own property or have a bank account, they were considered someone else's property, he was like, what? Like, that blew his mind. He kind of gets the whole that was happening to people of color because he's learned that a little more recently. But he can personalize it. So he's like, well, I don't understand what he used the word stereotype. There's a stereotype. It's like we're the nerdy white kids and the academy kids are the big black kids, and sometimes the academy kids are shoving us. And I'm like, well, think about it from their perspective, right? You get something they don't get right next door in the same building. And they integrate them for lunch and for football and band and all that stuff. But academically, no. You're separate. So what are they learning from that? And so I'm committed to putting him in there, but talking about it all the time out loud as my only strategy at this point. So that he doesn't go through that with his eyes shut. Is that our time?
Oh, we have time for about 4 more minutes.
Hi, my name is Susan Page, and this isn't about kids or education, so maybe I'm a little off, but earlier on you mentioned that white children need to be taught what to do when they're with black children to keep them safe. Mm-hmm. And my question is about that personally, because in a friendship that has been developing over several years, I'm traveling a little bit more with a black woman who's a friend of mine, and I know that there are fears, as I have them too, when you're on the road, if your car breaks down or anything like that. I feel way safer than she does in a situation like that, but if that were to happen, how would I be protecting her? I mean, what are the sorts of things that I can do to make sure she's at least as safe as I am?
The first is to speak up and to speak out, because the privilege of being white, and you have to use your privilege and your power for good, is that when something happens, they will listen to you first. So in your travels, if you're pulled over and she's driving or you're driving, whomever is driving, you should be the first person to speak. And I know that sounds crazy, and we shouldn't have to do that in this country, But the reality is the reality. And the first is that you speak up and say exactly what's happening. This is my dear friend. We are traveling together. How can I help you, officer? So that the officer knows right away that this isn't some woman trying to rob you, kill you, kidnap you, like,
Hide drugs in your car,
Right,
etc.
right,
All the
right.
stereotypes.
yeah.
It's sad but true. You kind of have to say, oh, she's with me. Everything's cool here. We're cool. But it makes more of a difference than you would think, just to put that out there, because it kind of takes all of that situation, defuses it a little bit, makes it all seem a little bit safer. But I think also just asking questions. Like my question about Jaheem's teacher has nothing to do with me, but I just question it. And so it's like, maybe you're in with police, or maybe you're in a restaurant, or somewhere where you are, where you feel like something's happening there, that you're able to be like, I have a question, what's happening here? Just, it's like shining light on it, just exposing the terrible infection that it is to air and light. There's a Martin Luther King quote about that, exposing like the boils to the natural medicine of air and light. And that's what we're doing nationally right now, putting it all out there.
And if you're in a space, there are spaces in Texas where I've pulled over and stopped and gone into the restaurant like, okay, God, this is not my restaurant. So if you know that your friend is kind of like, well, wait a minute, like this, something doesn't feel right, trust that she has a gut feeling and that she knows, and get out of there. Because you feel it. You feel it when you walk into a space, that this is not a welcoming space for me.
If that can be true for Dr. Robinson, it can be true for anybody, because like I said, with a PhD, right, we did a presentation together with a fancy PowerPoint and a bunch of research, and literally this woman in the audience said, I don't buy it, to her research. Knowing nothing about, never met her. She just said that out loud. And so like I had to like step in and be like, all right, so I'm saying it the same thing. Saying the same thing, telling you it's a real thing, telling you from my professional experience in social work that more kids of color are represented in every system, from foster care to death row. That is a fact. And she like kind of simmered down. Like, how bizarre is that? She's the one with the doctorate, not me.
Thank you very much.
And on that